Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of April. I'm Carrie Gracie. Welcome to Newsroom Live. The Duchess of Cambridge is in labour. It will be baby number 3. Let's go over to St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. Sarah Campbell is there.
Yes, here we are again, waiting outside possibly some of the most famous hospital steps in London, waiting for news of the arrival of royal baby number 3. We had the email earlier this morning, just after 8 o'clock, to say that the Duchess of Cambridge was in the early stages of labour and she had been admitted to hospital. We understand before 6 o'clock this morning, so really it's time to wait for that email, to wait for that tweet from Kensington Palace to tell us that a new prince or princess has been born. As you can imagine, hundreds of members of the world's press are waiting outside these hospital steps. Among them, the royal editor of the Sunday Express, Camilla Tominey. Here we are again.
Morning. Yes, Kate Expectations, as we've nicknamed it now. It's the third time we've been here, but that's all great. So we just have to wait and see, really. But for some reason, I think people are just assuming, because it's the third baby, that it's going to be quick. It doesn't necessarily work out like that. As a mother of 3, I can tell you that they all come in their own time. But we'll see.
So George was 10.5 hours labour, Charlotte 2.5 hours, but as you say, doesn't really tell us anything.
On that maxim, I mean, to be fair, even 10.5 hours is quick in some women's books who are in labour for a couple of days. And as she came in here at 6 this morning, the general feeling around is that we will hear something sooner rather than later. And then again, is there going to be a repeat of Princess Charlotte, where basically she was in, had the baby, and then out in the same day? I think as well, there is sometimes an impetus with mothers who have other children to get home sooner rather than later. When it's your first baby, you kind of have a bit more time to sink into it, whereas I always feel if you've got a newborn, you're really just desperate to introduce him or her to your other children.
Of course, last time round we had the really sweet shots of Prince George coming to meet his sister for the first time. One wonders whether they'll do that again, or whether, as you say, it will be a case of let's go home and let them meet them in private.
Yeah, I think it depends on what they feel, how they feel the children. The younger children will cope with so many people here, because obviously there are hundreds here outside. George was a little bit tentative when he came and gave a kind of royal wave and then wanted to cling on to Dad. So if that happened, what would be the case, I think, is we'd have an announcement that the baby has been born, and then William would whip back to Kensington Palace and bring both children. I think, I don't have it confirmed, but I think Sir Prince George is still off school and hasn't gone back yet. Again, if he's in school and it's term time, then he might not be available until after 3. And in the medium term, usually, weirdly, the first person that might be in is Kate's hairdresser, because she'll get zhuzhed up to come out here and face the press with the baby.
The early stages of pregnancy, whilst the births themselves, we understand, seem to be fairly straightforward. I mean, the length of time in hospital, but the early stages of pregnancy, difficult again this third time round.
Yeah, she's really suffered actually with hyperemesis gravidarum, which is this absolutely extreme form of morning sickness where, and I've spoken to a few mums for stories and otherwise who have suffered from the same condition, and basically you feel sick the whole time. It's absolutely awful. You can't really eat much. I think you can just have ginger tea and like a plain biscuit, and you can't really move without feeling nauseous. And that usually lasts, I think, for the first trimester, a little bit into the second, and then the symptoms abate. And we saw with the Duchess of Cambridge, she did initially cancel a number of engagements because there's also a risk of dehydration because you're being so ill and you can't keep any fluids down. But then in the second trimester, she seemed all right, and she's obviously been out and about lately, and the royals have been very much at the forefront just generally because of the Commonwealth Health Heads of a government meeting and Harry and Meghan's wedding that everyone's looking forward to. So yeah, she's been in the limelight and done quite well considering.
So it's less than a month till Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. You mentioned it there. Do you think we're likely to see the royal baby?
It's difficult to know, actually. I'm kind of thinking as a journalist and as a mother, would you bring a newborn along? I think if she brings help and she has the nanny with her, it also, I think, depends on what role George and Charlotte are going to take. So we're assuming that they're going to be a bridesmaid and page boy because they're obviously Harry's niece and nephew. And then will Kate need to be involved in marshalling them, and will it be difficult to have a newborn in tow? So still TBC'd, that one.
Let's talk about the role of this third baby. We've got the heir, Prince George, we've got the spare, Princess Charlotte. So what does baby number 3 do? Where do they fit in?
It's funny, isn't it? Because if you look back, and maybe the closest comparison is the Queen's third child, the Duke of York, and then they always say that he was the baby she had for herself, whatever that means. The notion of having an heir and having a spare and then going on and having more children, that's probably... It's probably just the case, to be honest, with Kate, that she was one of 3 and they wanted a third baby. I've got 3 kids, so I can vouch that the third child usually gets quite spoilt and gets away with quite a lot. So if they unkindly call Prince Harry the spare to the heir, then a third child, I suppose, gets to pretty much be flexible and do what they like. But as is ever the case, often royals further down the pecking order make a good contribution and they have their own role and they contribute to charity work. And I'm sure this baby, he or she, will be no different to that.
But what we do know, I think without the number of press here today shows that there is no lapse in interest in a royal baby, huge in George and Charlotte, and there will be in this one too.
I think there is huge interest. I mean, you go around the streets and maybe some people don't care either way, but then I've had a lot of interest just being a royal correspondent with when the baby's going to be due. Lots of people have been asking me that, and then how it's all going to work with the wedding. So we're in a bit of a period of royal fever simply because of Harry and Meghan, and so maybe that's added to it. And I think mums are just interested from the perspective of finding out all the details. We all like a good wedding, we all like a royal birth, and so there's some excitement about it in general.
And here we have 2 in 1 month. Camilla Tominey, Royal Editor of the Sun Express, thank you very much indeed. So there's really little that we can do apart from wait for that announcement. A tweet from Kensington Palace, the official birth notice will be put in front of Buckingham Palace gates on an easel. Back to you.
Sarah, thank you. The Prime Minister has restated her support for leaving the EU customs union ahead of a series of crunch votes in the Commons. Theresa May said quitting the union would enable Britain to strike deals which suit the UK with other countries around the world. Theresa May also said the government was seeking to secure as frictionless trade as possible across the Northern Ireland border. Her remarks are likely to reassure Brexiteers following newspaper suggestions that she might change her mind on the issue. Well, let's get more on this, and we're joined from Westminster by our Assistant Political Editor, Norman Smith. Again, Norman.
Carrie, thanks very much. Well, the Prime Minister this morning publicly stating what her officials have been saying over the weekend, namely there's not going to be any U-turn, cave-in, buckle over the issue of a customs union. Mrs May is determined to take us out of the customs union and not go into a customs union. She was asked during a visit to Dudley, she was visiting a local firm, and she was asked, what about this local firm? They export to the EU. What will be the impact for them if we leave the customs union?
Well, this is a great local business. It's a local business which is trading not just with countries in the European Union, but also with countries around the rest of the world. And so they would get an advantage from us actually being able to get good trade deals with other countries around the rest of the world. And coming out of the customs union means that we'll be free to have those deals that suit the United Kingdom. But I also recognise the importance for businesses like this of being able to have as frictionless a border as possible into the European Union. We've put forward proposals that will deliver that frictionless border and enable us to do trade deals around the rest of the world. I think that will be the best position for the United Kingdom, and that's what we're working for.
So the message from Mrs May, she is not going to backtrack over her pledge to leave the customs union, but we have crunch Commons votes coming up next month. May she have to think again? Well, I'm joined by the Shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer. Do you think Mrs May is going to have to think again?
Well, I think there's a growing recognition in Parliament that businesses, particularly manufacturing businesses, want us to be in a customs union so that they can continue to trade successfully. But equally importantly, that the solemn commitment that there should be no hard border in Northern Ireland is impossible to deliver without being in a customs union. There's growing numbers. The Labour Party is fully committed to that. A number of Conservative MPs are obviously worried that the Prime Minister's got this wrong. And it is going to come to a crunch, as you said. We've got votes stacked up waiting to come. And really our message to the government now is you've got to bring this on, you've got to resolve it and allow us to express the view of the House.
But surely Mrs May has left herself pretty much no room for manoeuvre here. She has said clearly, her officials have said clearly, we are not going to backtrack on a customs union.
Well, I think that's what's worrying a lot of people, but equally, she made the solemn commitment that there would be no infrastructure, no checks and no controls on the Northern Ireland border. And in a sense, you can't have both. And to give up on that solemn commitment in Northern Ireland would be a huge thing for politically for the Prime Minister to do. And I think that's really why so many people are so concerned, that they're saying, bring it on, let's have the vote. You can't leave this for any longer. This is now needing to be resolved.
If Mrs May was defeated on this, would it not be a key blow to her whole strategy towards Brexit, maybe even threaten a premiership?
Well, it would be a blow to her approach, because she's had a hard red line about the customs union in for a very, very long time. But that's why, in a sense, should be far better to rethink now and to take this forward positively, rather than sort of run away from the vote. So we need to resolve this in the national interest and in the economic interest of the UK as a whole. And we can't any longer be so concerned about party management by the Prime Minister. That, in a sense, has dictated the approach for far too long now.
Labour are going to oppose her on the issue of a customs union. Key is what happens to those group of Tory Remainers. Now, if, cometh the hour, the government says to them, look, this is in effect a vote of confidence, isn't the reality, they will back the government. Well,
I don't know. There's a big question whether it'll be a confidence vote. Obviously, that doesn't affect us in the opposition. It's not being set up as a confidence motion for our benefit. But I think there are a number of Conservative MPs who are very, very concerned about this. And I think that it is important that everybody votes in the national interest and the economic interest of the UK as a whole.
So, Keir Starmer, thanks very much indeed. Carrie, we'll get the first indication of how much support there is on the Tory benches for staying in a customs union on Thursday. It's not a binding vote, but it'll give us a sense of the number of Tory voices, whether it goes beyond the usual suspects. And then after the local elections, probably the back end of next month, we will get those key crunch votes on a customs union, which could be defining for Brexit and, yes, for Mrs May.
Norman, thank you. A professional chef who featured in MasterChef The Professionals has died after running at the London Marathon. 29-year-old Matt Campbell collapsed at the 22.5-mile mark, and despite receiving immediate medical treatment, he later died in hospital. He had been running in memory of his father Martin, who died in the summer of 2016. Earlier this month, he completed the Manchester Marathon in under 3 hours. The founder of the money-saving expert website is suing Facebook over claims the site published fake posts using his name and photo. Martin Lewis launches his case at the High Court today. He says he wants the social media giant to change the way it operates. Ben Ando reports.
These are just a few of the 50 or so Facebook ads that money-saving expert founder Martin Lewis says are nothing to do with him. Facebook, he claims, isn't doing enough to stop bogus ads, and people who trust his name are being ripped off. So he's suing for defamation and is promising to give any damages to anti-scamming charities. Facebook is free because of ads. It said, "We do not allow adverts which are misleading or false on Facebook, and have explained to Martin Lewis that he should report any adverts that infringe his rights and they will be removed." But Mr. Lewis isn't convinced.
I have reported it time and time again over the last year. I've put them on notice that I don't do ads. So any advert with my name and face in is fake. Stop running them, and it does nothing.
It's been a tough few weeks for Facebook and its founder Mark Zuckerberg over concerns about its use of personal data. Martin Lewis is hoping his legal challenge will make Facebook face up to issues around misleading ads. Ben Ando, BBC News.
Well, we'll be hearing from Martin Lewis's lawyer at just after 12:30. A body recovered from the River Elbe in Hamburg is that of missing Scot Liam Colgan. That's according to the Lucy Blackman Trust, which helps the families of people missing abroad. The 29-year-old from Inverness was attending his brother's stag do in the German city when he disappeared on the 10th of February. While formal identification is yet to be carried out, Mr Colgan's driving licence is said to have been found in the pocket of the jacket. Sir Cliff Richard has returned to court as his battle against the BBC over its coverage of a police raid on his home continues. The 77-year-old singer claims footage of the raid, carried out following an allegation of sexual assault, was a very serious invasion of his privacy. Well, our correspondent Helena Lee is outside the High Court for us. Helena, what's happening there today?
Well, this is day 8, Carrie, of Sir Cliff Richard's privacy case against the BBC. We know from his lawyers that he's seeking damages at the very top end from the broadcaster. Now, in court this morning, we've been hearing more evidence from somebody called Declan Wilson. Now, Mr. Wilson used to be the former Northern Bureau editor at BBC News, and he was the line manager of Dan Johnson. Dan Johnson, of course, the reporter who broke the story about Sir Cliff Richard in 2014. Now, Declan Wilson has been telling the court about when Dan Johnson went to him with information from South Yorkshire Police about the investigation into Sir Cliff Richard. Declan Wilson told the court he didn't ask specific details about Dan Johnson's source of the story, but we know that Dan Johnson is not revealing that source to court. Now, in court, Declan Wilson was asked by Sir Cliff Richard's barrister, are you saying that the tip-off about the singer being investigated was low credibility? Declan Wilson, replied, it had potential to be of high credibility. And then, Carrie, we heard about an email that Declan Wilson sent to his boss, Gary Smith. Gary Smith used to be the UK news editor at BBC News. Declan Wilson told Gary Smith in this email about details of the investigation into Sir Cliff Richard. Gary Smith replied to that email, quoting lyrics from a Cliff Richard song. Congratulations and jubilations. I want the whole world to know I'm as happy as can be. Declan Wilson was then asked by Sir Cliff Richard's barrister, you were both really excited about that. Declan Wilson replied, it was a massive story. Now, Mr. Wilson is continuing to give evidence here, Carrie, in court, and later on this afternoon and later this week, we're expecting to hear a bit more from senior BBC News editors in terms of how they covered the story and their justifications for that coverage.
Helena, thanks for that update. The headlines now on BBC Newsroom Live. The Duchess of Cambridge has been admitted to hospital. Kensington Palace say she is in labour. The government insists it will leave the EU's customs union after Brexit, ahead of a symbolic vote on the issue this week. 29-year-old chef Matt Campbell, who reached the semi-finals of MasterChef The Professionals, collapsed and died during yesterday's London Marathon.
Yeah, more.